Hello, my friends. So I kind of want to address the Mewtwo Pagan Challenge, but I'm going to kind of approach it from the position of understanding hate. If you could wave a magic wand and make hate disappear throughout the entire world, would you do it? And secondly, if you could wave a magic wand and collect everybody in the world who hated and put them into a concentration camp, and then over time they would simply just kind of disappear, would you do it? Now, the reason why I pose that question is because there's two aspects to that. One is actually eliminating hate. The other one is eliminating the people who hate. And there's a big difference between these two. Now, the reason why I say that is because I kind of look at a lot of the atmosphere today, and it doesn't look like people actually want to eliminate hate. They actually want to eliminate the people who they perceive as hating, and that is very dangerous. Because, you see, we're all good people, and we all act for the best, or what we believe to be the best, or what we perceive to be the best, or the most virtuous, or, you know, we're doing it for the greater good of humanity. And if you can't justify hate simply for the fact of hate. Maybe some people do. But for the most part, you justify your position. You justify why you're doing it. Why are you doing that to somebody? Because they deserve it. Why do you treat that person that way? Because they did it themselves. They deserve it. So that action needs a justification for it. You can't just hate somebody just to, well, make them the scapegoat and project your hatred onto them. No, because that would be wrong. So you have to justify it. And that is the dangerous, slippery slope. If you are justifying your anger and you're justifying your hatred towards someone, you're just trying to find an excuse to project your hatred against someone. And that is, that's very destructive. That's actually even worse than somebody who just hates somebody because they hate them. Why do you hate them? Because they are who they are. At least they're being honest about it. And still doesn't make it right. But you can't eliminate hate by replacing it with hate. It's the same side of the battery. It's the same side of the coin. It's just you believe that what you're doing is you're eliminating hate, but you're not. You're just replacing hate with hate. The only way you can actually eliminate hate is by flipping that around and filling it with acceptance and love. It's the only way to eliminate hate. If you're justifying hate by filling it with hate, you're not eliminating it. You're just perpetuating it. But now, instead of it being hate because somebody is this way, you're hating them because they're that way. It doesn't work that way. So this leads into the Be the Witch You Change conversation. And it seems like this has been directed towards quote-unquote fluffy bunnies. And I kind of have a good idea of what a fluffy bunny is, but I also understand that there's a lot of various different opinions out there on things and how people approach them and what they believe and how they're eclectic, and they throw this in and they throw that in, and there's just different beliefs, and especially Wicca, because Wicca is such, and most pagan approaches to spirituality or religion are very eclectic. They're very much individual. There's no strict dogma that says you must do this, you must do that. Some people do try to get kind of like this dogma mentality going, and it usually ends up causing more chaos and destruction than it's really worth, in my opinion, because then you start getting people who interpret it like too literally, like the Wiccan read. Oh, you can't do that because it'll come back to you 3 times and it harm none, do what you will. They take that concept and they just whittle it down to something that is just absurd. And then people laugh at it and they go, oh, the Wiccan Rede, that's just absurd, blah, blah. And then they rattle on and explain exactly why, because they brought that all the way to the point of absurdity. It's not supposed to be taken like a biblical, literal dogma. It's just a guideline. It's an understanding of cause and effect. Do you affect the world this way? That's the cause. It's just understanding the relation between one thing and the other. Every action has a reaction. Every consequence has a result. And that is, in my opinion, at the heart of the Wiccan Rede and the threefold law. Threefold law is just kind of weird that only something would come back 3 times. If you take it literally, why would it only be 3 times? Is there some kind of a deity who's in charge of this? Like, okay, wait, that would be too much. That would be too little. It has to be exactly 3 times this. No, 3 times is just a concept. It is, the origins of it are in question. I believe it came from probably the 2nd degree initiation in the British traditional Wicca tradition. It could be, there's just different interpretations of it. But not every single person who practices witchcraft or identifies as a witch follows that same tradition. So if you are Wiccan and you are pushing your dogma on someone else, they're not going to accept it. And if you identify with Wicca, that is your identification. That is the way that you perceive things. It doesn't mean that everybody out there follows the same path as you. And this is a part of the fluffy bunny area that needs to be just understood. And lastly, I don't like this growing atmosphere, and I think this is what everybody's kind of touching on in many of these videos. I don't like this atmosphere of it's justified to make fun of fluffy bunnies. It's justified to disparage them a little bit. It's justified to laugh at them. It's justified to belittle them and make them seem like they're, childish, petty, and kind of small and don't really understand witchcraft completely. There's this kind of superiority that some people who practice a witchcraft tradition that is separate from Wicca kind of take this position of superiority. And Wicca is a kind of a lesser tradition. It's something you start out with. It's like preschool for witches. No, it is not preschool for witches. It is not preschool for witches. From my understanding, there's several different witchcraft traditions, and I'm talking about European witchcraft here, so don't start in the comments, don't start throwing in all these other traditions out there. I'm talking about European witchcraft. There are people who basically create their own path. They create their own tradition. They create their own practice of witchcraft based upon authors and what they believe witchcraft is, and that's what they build upon. It's very, very eclectic witchcraft traditions. Then you have people who believe that what they are doing is they are doing reconstruction of ancient witchcraft traditions going back from 15th, 13th century and beyond, and they're reconstructing witchcraft, which back in my day we called reconstructionists. They are trying to actually find out what did witches believe, how did they practice, and let's look at them honestly, and they try to create that. Then you have people who supposedly come from a family tradition, and their tradition supposedly goes back to such and such and such. Whether or not that's actually their family or it's a tradition that they follow, which they believe is a tradition that goes back to such and such a time, going back to the 15th, 13th century and beyond. They believe that there's an unbroken lineage going on to them today. And Wicca originally sort of fell into that same category, where Gardner believed that he had come across a coven, a New Forest coven, which went back and back and back, and part of that witchcraft cult. And there's a lot of people who kind of don't agree with that. And so they say, okay, fine. What we'll do is we'll start at 1939 when Gardner claimed to have been initiated into the New Forest coven, and we'll start from that point. So because they were basically honest about it and started it in 1939 and went on, people are very happy to say, oh, well, Wicca is a new religion. It just started in 1939. It started with Gardner. That's what we know. That is what we honestly know. We don't. Philip Heselton and other authors have tried to verify people before that period, and they've sort of accomplished it, but there's still some question there. Like, they don't know exactly for sure. So it's kind of like it's being honest about where something began. So I'm growing a little tired of people kind of punching Wicca and thinking it's justified and it's okay to punch them because they're silly people who invented a religion in the 1950s. No, it's not. If you have a tradition goes back before 1950 or 1939, make a video about it. Give your sources. Verify it. I would love to learn more about that. And that would be something. That would be great. But in the meantime, people have different paths. They have different traditions that they practice. And just because one particular one, which happens to be Wicca or the traditional Wicca path, is honest about where our beginnings is, and understanding that from that, other authors have taken on that term Wicca and carried it on and made other paths which nowadays people follow, which really doesn't have too much of a similarity to traditional Wicca practices such as Gardnerian and Alexandrian, doesn't mean that those other paths are not valid. They're just based off of Wicca and going off on their own individual eclectic paths. And it doesn't make what they're practicing invalid, and it doesn't make it childish, and it doesn't make it preschoolish. It's their path, and that's what they're forging for themselves. They are essentially doing the same thing that Gardner was doing. Is what they are doing is they're collecting and forming and creating their own path. So instead of Gardner's witchcraft or Alexander's witchcraft, they're creating Samuel's witchcraft or Daniel's witchcraft or Bobby's witchcraft or Michelle's witchcraft. That's what Gardner did. That's what Alexander's did. So they're doing what the people did before them. Now, there are traditions, obviously, which are initiatory traditions, which you can't just claim to be part of an initiatory tradition. You actually have to be welcomed into that tradition, and that is their tradition, and then you follow a certain way, and you're following Gardner's tradition, or you're following Alexander's tradition, or somebody else's tradition, but it is part of that tradition. And again, that in itself does not make it preschoolish or stupid or made up. It may very well have been made up at 1939 by Gardner. That's very common. It's a very common argument for it. But there's definitely a strong connection to the Western occult magical tradition. And that's something that, I don't know, I'm going to keep an open mind to it. But in the meantime, it started in 1939 because that's basically when we can verify that it started. Anyhow, I am rambling on at this point. Basically, if you find yourself justifying violence and justifying hatred towards another group for whatever reason, you need to take a serious look at yourself, because all you're doing is you're just justifying a reason to replace hate with your form of hate, and it's not right. So please take a look in the mirror and understand that you don't actually want to eliminate hate. You want to eliminate who you perceive as perpetuating hate, and that in itself is hate. Kind of a weird roundabout way of looking at it, but anyhow. Thank you so much, and blessed be.
Ha 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 ha!